Hi guys, okay, today's video is going to be about replacing the brakes on a Magirus S3500 this one's from 1952, as most of them are, but this will be a similar system I'm sure on most vintage Magirus trucks, and it's probably the most important thing of the truck is the brakes, because we all want to enjoy our holidays in these trucks. And the most likely thing to fail and spoil the holiday, meaning that we are by the roadside, is the brakes. And also, as a matter of safety, we're taking our families in these trucks and other road users, and if the brakes fail on a vehicle which is weighing 5, 6, 7 tons, there's a lot of damage to be done. So I have replaced the brakes on my Magirus truck here, and I'm going to talk through a few of the points that you need to take into consideration when replacing the brakes on one of these trucks. Now, when I start a job like this, I like to try and get it better than new. Now, I know that you're going to think, how are you going to get something that's 69 years old better than new? Well, the answer to that is that I am not limited by time. So when this was assembled in the factory, the mechanic who was putting it together would have been on a time schedule that he had to do both front brakes in an hour, or whatever the time schedule was. I don't have a time schedule, so if it takes me a week of evenings to do this, I can do that, so I can take my time. The second thing is that modern materials, such as these brake shoes, are much better than the original materials, so we can improve things that way. There's also some stainless steel in here, which I'm going to come to. And the third thing is cost. When Magirus are making a vehicle, or any company is making a vehicle, they are doing it to a cost. They have to. Cost it has to be taken into account all the way through. And with us, with a hobby, we're not so limited on cost, and if it costs a few euros more for something that's, you know, maybe an improvement, we could probably stretch a few euros more. So that again means that we can get things better than new. And I'm quite convinced that this brake that I've just rebuilt here is better than new, and I'm going to go through the reasons why. Okay, let's start with nuts and bolts. Firstly, the bolts on the hub here. Now, I like to keep original bolts. Let's try and zoom in. I don't know if this is going to focus enough, but these are Kamax bolts, and the reason I like to keep them is because the German bolts are likely to be better quality than any Chinese equivalent. So I remove these, I clean up the threads with a dye, and then I replace them. And what I do is there's a spring washer behind every bolt. I never use spring washers again, so I've replaced the spring washers with stainless steel spring washers. These are M8, these bolts, so you need 3 M8 spring washers, the original bolts with the threads cleaned, and that tidies up that nicely. The second thing is the wheel cylinder. Now, this is the most important aspect of the brakes and the most likely thing to fail. Now, the wheel cylinders that I've got here are new old stock, which we call NOS, genuine ATE cylinders. Now, I've sourced these because I'm very keen on original parts, and you know, these are going to cost a bit more, but there's no need to source these because the Magirus Club in the Netherlands has a very good reproduction available of these cylinders, which are very similar and work very well, and they're available brand new from the Magirus Club, and many truck owners are using those, so you can get those cylinders new. Now, this is why the cylinder is the most important thing. I'm going to show you the cylinders that I've taken off this truck, which is sitting down here. And if I take the end off one, this is the state inside of the cylinder. Please pay close attention to this. Now, this is a truck which has always been stored indoors. It's a very low mileage truck. It's not, you know, it's a very, very nice, probably one of the best surviving examples of an S3500 that exists today. It's had a nice life and been looked after. It's not something that's sat in the field. And this is the state of the brake cylinder. Now, clearly this is an incredibly dangerous thing to have a brake cylinder in this condition. And I would like to point out the brakes were working fine. Yeah, so with this cylinder like this, the brakes were still working. I didn't have a brake failure, but it's a failure that's waiting to happen at any minute, and you'll lose all the brakes and there'll be a massive accident. So if you haven't looked at your brakes in, say, the last 10 years, this will be the state of them. I am confident it will, and other members of the club have also confirmed that this is the state of the brakes when they've taken them apart. So this is a really important job to do, A, for safety, and B, so you have a great holiday. Anyway, so they are clearly in the bin. They're no good for anything. And I've replaced with a new old stock wheel cylinder. The second point is the brake shoes. Now I've had the shoes relined. The original linings would be asbestos and they got thin, and I've had these relined with a modern braking material which is better and also safer for dust because it's asbestos free. Now the original shoes are just held on with rivets, with pairs of rivets, which is a perfectly good system. These replacement linings have been held on with both. You might be able to see it in here. Here we go, we can see it coming out. They've been bonded on like a modern lining, but they've also been riveted on. So it's a double joining system. And the advantage of this is that apart from the rivets on the end, there's not a need to use pairs of rivets all the way down because you've got the bonding as well. And you'll find on shoes they crack across the rivets. If you take an old pair of shoes off, you find that they crack because it's a weak point. And by only using the one rivet in opposites all the way down, that should hopefully prevent that cracking. And the bonding is very, very strong. It's what's used on modern vehicles. So this, again, is another improvement and well worth doing. This is the main spring. Now I've replaced these springs with brand new springs which are available again from the Magirus Deutz Club in the Netherlands. The reason I've replaced them is because the old springs can get a bit fatigued, a bit tired. And when I put one of the new springs next to one of the old springs, which wasn't broken, there was a 1 centimetre difference in length. Now that is just because the old spring had become tired and stretched and fatigued, and so it is stretched to 1 centimetre longer. Now there's nothing wrong, you could still use that old spring, but to do a job to this level, I think, well, why not? Let's replace the springs and have them at the original tension. So that's, you know, what I've done. I bought new springs from the club and we've got a lot of tension back there. Now these are very, very hard to fit. They are not fun to fit. You're going to need a set of brake pliers like this. Now the problem with these pliers is that they're designed, this spiked end that we see here is designed to rest on the shoe here. Now it's designed to bite into the shoe so you can pull the spring on. Now I don't like that, having just paid a lot of money to have these nice new linings on. I don't want lots of holes put in them by that tool. So the way to get around that is take a piece like so of old strap that you have and you rest it over there. Now that's going to protect the shoe, but it's going to slip. So what you then need is another ratchet strap to go all the way around both the shoes over the top of this, and you crank that up so it's going all the way around in a circle. I use this strap here which we can hopefully see, and this is my circle, and I circled it all the way around both shoes, and then I ratcheted it tight. That pulled that onto there tight, and then that protected this surface. A nice simple thing to do. The tool still gripped in very well and it hasn't damaged the surface of the brake shoe, so this is a win-win-win. So there's a method to do that. Some of the products that I've used here I'm going to cover. Now you'll see that everything's been repainted. I've used a paint that I use on pretty much everything, and I've tried a lot of different paints over the years, and most of them are disappointing. They don't apply well and they don't look nice. The reason I like this paint is because it's a satin finish, not a gloss, which I think looks more like the factory finish, and it's a very, very high zinc content paint, which means it's anti-rust for a start, and It also can bear high temperature well because of the high zinc in it, so it's a win-win paint again, plus it's incredibly fast drying. It's touch dry within 15 minutes, completely touch dry, and it's very easy to apply, it doesn't run. This is the paint, let's just grab it for camera, here it is here. It's called ZG90 Anti-Rust Paint with Zinc. It comes in colour black there, and it's available in these cans, and I just can't recommend it enough. It's a really easy, user-friendly paint, and it's ideal for virtually everything on your truck. And that satin finish is much nicer than gloss. It looks more professional. So I've used that on everything. Everything is painted with that, and that works very well. Okay, when you when you get your brake cylinders from the club, they'll have come assembled. Now, what we want to do to make sure that the rubbers are moving nicely is to smear the rubbers inside with some of this, which is brake grease. It's a special grease which is compatible with brake fluid, and you can use it inside the cylinders. So you want to give a nice coating to the rubber, take the rubbers out, give them a nice coating of this so they're nice and smooth, and put them back in. The other thing I've done is that once this has been fully assembled, I've taken these rubbers off the end, and then I've smeared again with a smear of brake grease in there. And if everything inside is, once it's assembled, is then smeared with this brake grease, I'm hoping that it at least gives some protection against this reoccurring, because the surface that we see that's very rusty will be protected with a film of grease. So that is going to only help that. So that's a special brake grease, which is called a rubber grease, to use for that application. The second grease that we use for assembly, well, I use for assembly on these, is called a ceramic grease. And it's here, it's ceramic brake grease. Now, this is a grease that is made especially for reassembling brake components. You can also use it on exhaust studs and other similar components, and the reason that we use this grease is because it's incredibly heat proof and it's non-melting. It's a non-melting heat proof grease made especially for assembly of components which are under very high heat. Now, in order for the brakes to work properly, there's a couple of pivot points. There's pivot points here, and then obviously on the other side there's another pivot point, and then in the center there is the main pivot point. Now, it's crucial that all those points can pivot freely in order for the brakes to work, and also for the pads to wear evenly. The shoes are not going to wear evenly if any of those points are seized. Now, this point has a 15 kilo resistance, and there's other videos available, or the club can explain to you how to make a 15 kilo resistance in that point. But it still has to move, and the pivot at the bottom should be completely free to move. We can just sneak around and get that again. That should be free to move altogether. So give a nice smear of the ceramic brake grease to all of those points. That's completely safe. It will keep them lubricated and moving freely, and it's not going to harm your brake shoes or anything else. Now, that central point, again, I'm just sneaking around to get it. The central point is the most important part of these brakes. That really does need to remain free. On the central point, there's a selection of shims which are needed so there's no side play, otherwise you'd get movement in the shoes. And they're shimmed up at the front to eliminate that side play as that's reassembled. The problem with the original shims is that they are mild steel, and they rust, as mild steel will, and even if they only get a slight surface rust on them, they then become stiff because the rust is building up between the shims. That makes them tight, and then that doesn't allow that to pivot like we want freely. So with a combination of the ceramic brake grease and then replacing the shims with stainless steel, that means that we know that pivot is going to remain free. So these are the shims that you need, and I'm going to go down the sizes. This, hopefully you can see the sizes on the screen, and we're starting with a 2mm shim, and then a 1mm shim, a 0.5mm shim, and then the circlips which go on the end. Now, to do the all 4 brakes, I would recommend that you buy 12 of these and then 4 of these each. That's all you're going to need. So you basically need 3 of these per wheel and then 1 of these each per wheel. And if you have that combination, you will be able to match up whatever's needed on your own truck. And then obviously nice stainless circlips to go on the ends. And then we've rebuilt that pivot in the centre behind here, and it's better than factory. There's no question, because it's impossible for it to rust, because we've got the stainless components, which allows it to be free, and then with the ceramic brake grease it's also completely free. So this is a great improvement over original, and again well worth doing. Okay, I think that's covered most of the things on there. What else have I got here? What I've got on the floor here is a piece of pipe. This pipe is 7mm fuel hose. I hope you can see that's a 7mm fuel hose. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a section of this pipe, and then I'm going to cut it lengthways with a Stanley knife. What I'm going to do is that is going to go over, we can see here, where the hard line is coming through the chassis. And as it comes through the chassis, it goes through this hole, and there's a chance, as it is now, of knocking on that hole, which is not what we want, because then it could damage the hard line. So I'm going to make a sleeve that goes around that. This hard line is 6mm, so the 7mm fuel hose is ideal to go over this, and then all we need is to cut it, slide it over, and then use a couple of these zip ties tied up tight around where you've made the cut, and that then protects that hard line. Nice simple little safety fix, takes minutes and well worth doing. For cleaning the brakes, you're going to need a brake cleaner. This is again something that's readily available. This one I'm using here is by Manol, but this is safe to clean any of these components of grease before you paint it. It's safe to use on all components in here, so this is something you're going to need, some brake cleaner. This is the grease that I've used for the wheel bearings, which are in here. You'll need about 1 tube a side, just under, but if you buy 2 tubes, that's enough to do both sides. Now, I like to use this red grease. If you open up a sealed bearing from a factory somewhere, you'll generally find that they use this grease. It's only about €1, €2 more for a tube of red grease than it is for standard grease. And the reason I prefer this grease is it's more sticky, and it's also more water repellent too. It's definitely more sticky, you can feel it's more tacky, and it also is more water repellent. But this is readily available, just EP2 red, and I always use this for everything, and it's great for wheel bearings. So the bearings in this are rebuilt with this, and this is readily available anywhere for you to buy, so well worth buying, and it's cheap. And yeah, just under a tube for each side if you're doing a full rebuild, and you're about there. I hope that that's covered everything in here. The only other thing to remember, obviously, when you're putting this spring on, is to make sure that these adjusters are both wound to 0, so they need to be completely wound to 0 so the shoes can be as close together as they can, and then you ratchet strap them nice and tight together before trying to put this on with the protection that I mentioned. And then you've got it all rebuilt, and your holidays are going to be safe and fun, and you're going to have some peace of mind, and all well worth doing. If you're not able to do this work yourself, and you don't have a workshop and you haven't got these components, the Magirus Club in the Netherlands have various members who they have Martin, who lives on site, and other members who would be willing to undertake this work for you if you can get your truck to the club, and then the club have these parts in stock. And that's another way of approaching this job, to ask some of the club members to tackle it for you. And as long as you can get the truck to the clubhouse, then they can rebuild your brakes for you, and you're gonna, have a lovely safe vehicle to use on your holidays and for peace of mind. So I hope that video, should I say, is useful and inspires some people to open up the hubs on their own trucks and really fix these brakes so they work well. And it is important to remember that, you need to just finally look at these components again that I've taken. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to share something with you. I'm currently doing the brakes on the Magirus, and as some of you know and some of you won't know, I drove this Magirus back from the Netherlands to the UK, across from Hoek van Holland to Harwich, and then another hour and a half's drive from Harwich to my home. And the Magirus drove fine. The only problem was I had a little bit of a sticky brake on one of the back wheels, so the hub got a bit hot. But the front brakes were working perfectly. They didn't pull to one side, they were releasing very well. The front brakes worked really nicely, there was no issue at all. I am currently refurbishing the brakes, taking them apart on all the different wheels and replacing what's necessary, brake linings and cylinders and whatever is necessary. Anyway, I wanted to post this as a word of warning to everyone that just because your Magirus is braking very nicely, it doesn't mean there's some major problems in there, especially if the brakes haven't been taken apart for a while. These are the front cylinders that came off a couple of days ago, and this is the state of them inside. Now, both of these were leaking, as you'd expect, but you couldn't see them leaking from the outside. They were leaking into the drum, and on the back plates they look dry. On the back, they look fine from the outside. They didn't show a sign of leaking fluid. And this is the state inside of these. I mean, it's a major accident waiting to happen with your family in your truck. Just an immediate brake failure all of a sudden when it finally gives and there's no brakes at all. So yeah, here's the other side, which as you can see is in a very similar state. And I know it's hard to believe because you see these and you think that truck, has been, it's a restoration project, it's been off the road for years, it can't brake, and that isn't the case. This is why I'm posting this video, to say that this vehicle runs nicely. It's got low kilometers, and I drove it, from the Netherlands, all the way home, an hour and a half. I drove it in the dark as well, having never driven one before, and the brakes were fine. The brakes worked absolutely fine. I wasn't worried about the brakes, and on taking them apart, this is what I found, and you couldn't see it from the outside. So now we're all in lockdown, and we've got a bit of time on our hands, and we're talking about our trucks. I thought that some people might want to pull the drums off in their workshop and have a look inside, pull the rubbers off the end of these cylinders and have a look and see what's inside your cylinders. It's not a big job to pull the drums off. You can do that with very simple tools. And have a look inside your cylinders in the winter so your trucks are ready for the summer and they don't look like this, because I would have never ever have expected to have found this. Anyway, that's it. Good evening, gentlemen.